Okay, so we're picking up now with Romans 1:18 through 25. So I'm going to start now. We've got some of our smaller phrases connected. Now we need to start broadening out and connecting the rest of these propositions. Okay. So let me show you how to do that. All right, let's go back up to some of our smaller ones and begin to broaden them out. So the question you got to ask is, for example, again, you just got to think through what's the relationship between these ideas. Okay, you'll notice in verse 18 that well, let me back up. You notice in verse 19 to 20 that there seems to be a relationship between God making these things manifest to them, and then how He's making these things manifest to them. What I'm just suggesting is that the relationship between verse 19 and verse 20 is sort of an idea and explanation. Why am I saying that? Because that God is making manifest Himself to them, and then Paul is going to explain how God is making Himself manifest to them. You might call it an action manner or something like that, like God made Himself available, manifest to them by, revealing Himself in the created order. But I think an idea explanation works here as well. God made Himself manifest, and how does He make Himself manifest? Well, let me explain that, Paul might say. I'm going to explain it by saying that God made His eternal attributes and power manifest in a created order. Okay? So it would look like this. Like that's the relationship between verse 19 and 20. So again, we're backing up to understand more and more of the relationships between broader concepts and propositions. Okay. Now to let's think a little bit about how verse 18 relates to verse 19 and 20. Okay. The most obvious way it might relate is a grounds clause. God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who unrighteously suppress the truth, and they really do suppress the truth. Sort of my added comments there. How do we know they really suppress the truth? Because, verse 19, what God made manifest to them, they have rejected. They have rejected God and the created order. The obvious truths about the world, mankind suppresses those ideas. And that's why God's wrath is revealed against these who unrighteously suppress the truth. So it's defending the concept, it's grounding, it's giving you a reason to understand how God's wrath is revealed against people who unrighteously suppress the truth. So I'm going to call verse 18 in relationship to verse 19 through 20 a grounds. Okay? So it will look like this in your diagram for tracing. All right? Now, let's think again. Now we've got verse 20c hanging out there. Okay? So I'm saying the result of this suppressing the truth is that they are now without excuse. Well, that sounds an awful lot like what verse 18 has basically already said, doesn't it? I mean, God is revealing wrath against those who unrighteously suppress the truth. Verse 20c. The result of those who suppress the truth is that they are without excuse. It seems like there's a relationship between those two ideas. What I would say is this. Verse 18 is being grounded by verse 19 and 20. He explains why God is revealing His wrath against them and why they suppress the truth. And then verse 20 is sort of the conclusion to verse 19 through 20. So verse 18 is true because of verse 19 through 20. And because of verse 19 through 20, verse 20c is true. Let me say that again. Verse 18 is true because of verse 19 through 20b. And verse 20c is true because of verse 19 through 20b. In other words, verse 20c is the conclusion of verses 19 and 20b. It's saying, because these things are true, therefore, the result is they are without excuse. I hope that makes sense. This is not an easy passage to get your feet wet in diagramming, but what this is called in tracing language is a bilateral. I know that's, you might not have any idea what I'm talking about, but you will just need to review the tracing handouts to understand what a bilateral is. Yeah. So again, verse 18 is true because of verse 19 through 20b, and verse 20c is true because of verse 19 through 20b. So this is called a bilateral. All right. It's okay if you're a little confused. Just hang in there. So again, verse 18, this is true because verse 19 through 20b. Then verse 20c would say, because of verse 19 through 20b, verse 20c is true. So in other words, verse 18 and verse 20c are both using verse 19 through 20 to defend their idea. Hopefully that makes sense. When that happens, that's what's called a bilateral. Okay? All right, now let's look down at verse 21, because we still have some work to do here. Okay? Let's look at verse 21. Okay, what's the relationship between some of these ideas? Okay, let's just work our way through. Okay, let's look at verse 22 because that's a little easier. Verse 22 and 23. How did they become fools? We might say they professed to be wise, but they became fools. How? Well, they exchanged the glory of God for the incorruptible. The glory of the incorruptible God for the likeness of corruptible things. So they professed to be wise, but they became fools. The action and the manner. They became fools in that they behaved that way. Okay? Action and manner. Now, we can back up further. And, well, let's move down to verse 24. And, let's just go all the way down to 25. Very similar sort of relationship. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, or the lie. How? They worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator. Again, action and manner. They exchanged the truth of God and that they worship the creature rather than the creator. Okay. We can back up now and just continue to think through these ideas and see the relationships now between verse 24 and 25. Look at verse 25a. It begins with the word for. Okay? So let's look at verse 24. God handed them over in the desires of their hearts to uncleanness, so that their bodies would be dishonored among themselves. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. In other words, you might be saying, what's the relationship between verse 24 and 25? God handed them over, the main idea of verse 24, because they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. So God had reason for handing them over. So you see that there? God handed them over because, verse 20 begins with 4. That's the grounds, that's the reason God did what he did.